40 a.m. I'm actually at the moment in Vancouver, Canada. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. So to be here at the very first talk or seminar series from Ready Institute and PRI and the Royal Society of Chemistry sponsoring this series. Well, it is actually part of a project, so we are utilizing that as well. Was one of our goals from the fund that we received and last year on diversity and inclusion to introduce indigenous science in a chemistry curriculum. So my name is Raphael. My pronouns he him. I'm a researcher, professor of chemistry. At the moment, I would say I'm here in Vancouver, in Canada. But next week I'll be back in Germany. We're gonna be leading my new laboratory. We'll be moving to there. So yeah, it's a big new adventure. And I'm also a founder and president of Ready Institute, where we are responsible to build scientific communities with respect, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Is a non-for-profit organization based here in Canada, in Brazil, and some parts in Europe, especially Spain, Portugal, UK, and Germany. So yeah, the Ready Institute was funded last in 2020. So it's been like, yeah, it's brand new, it's a bunch of scientists. I'm just going to give you a background, a little bit about Ready Institute before we begin with today's presentation. So, well, before we begin, it is very traditional for us here in Ready Institute. I'm pretty sure as well at the PRI that we do a land acknowledgement. If you don't know, what is that for, essentially we try to be respectful of the land where we stay, where we are on, and to be grateful for peoples that came before us. So therefore we recognize and honor the indigenous people who have occupied these lands for millennia and look to them to guide us in caring for the land respectfully, consciously, and healthy ways to safeguard it for those to come. So that's very important to acknowledge that. So I will ask you all to take like a half a second to actually think about this land acknowledgement. If you don't know where you are located in the sense of the land, who belongs to, and then we should ask our question, whose land I'm on, and then you can just type in the nativeland.ca, and then you enter the name of the city or the country, and then you see the indigenous group of communities around the area where you're at. So yeah, that's very important to introduce the Ready Institute before we begin here. That was founded in 2020. We count with more than 70 researchers. That we're all volunteers, but we count with researchers, educators, and professionals in the field of science, technology, engineering, math, STEM, and the mission is to challenge and reduce systemic barriers and work collaboratively in strategies, training, integration, and learning events like this one for researchers and people like and STEM professionals, enabling innovation and culture change. So that's one that's our identity at Ready Institute. So we a bunch of scientists from STEM field. We try to work on evidence-driven inclusion and diversity activities, enabling data gathering, transparency, and also using data as an evidence-led action for equitable access. So, and of course, our mission is to build a powerful, connected, and coordinated movement to promote respect, equity, diversity, and inclusion in STEM, research, and education. And our vision is that everyone has equal opportunities and access to successful career in the areas of STEM, and of course through innovation and inclusiveness in opportunities in special science. So here are some of our values that we try to work as a catalyst and bring in increasing awareness, work towards a transparency. We try to use a data-driven approach, and we are non-party, and one of our methodologies is to work through intersectionality, and where we look all the problems that we face regarding to diversity and inclusion through the lens, through intersectionality lens. So therefore, we need to get ready to help us. We try to build awareness and see motivation and apply strategies. So essentially, what, why, and how. So here we try to kind of integrating into different spheres. So, and then this is our area of expertise: STEM outreach, traditional knowledge, inclusive education, social and equity impact. And our research programs is a Circular Hub, Ignite, Mind, and SUMA. So the circular, we talk about circular economy, how that would impact historically marginalized communities, especially with the climate change, water quality, environment, or we talk about environment racism. And then we have Mind, where we talk about mental health. Ignite, we working on data, educational and research data gathering. And then SUMA Hub, where we talk about traditional knowledge, so traditional ways of doing things or doing science, and I try to include or approach that in a Western, include that in a Western science activities. So, and also we have a spin-off company where we work in assistive technologies called Symbiosis. So SUMA Hub, that's this research program that we are kind of doing here today, is actually where we try to connect with the cultural aspect of things, of knowledge, especially indigenous knowledge, and then try to integrate that in a Western science or in STEM education, because mostly what we learn in school at universities is through the Eurocentric approach. So we try to actually utilize traditional ways of knowing and combine that with the traditional Western science way. So, but essentially try to create more inclusive environments. And SUMA stands for like adding and a sum of things, a sum of knowledge, where we have here this logo represents, we have various representations where we collect informations from ways how indigenous peoples build canoes, housing, also cultivating food or hunting, gathering, and all that stuff is combined here in this logo to represent the sum and ways of the knowledge that flows through different paths in our society. So, and of course, the seminar series we call the STEAM and the indigeneity of pigments. STEAM stands for science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And we're going to be talking to the next hour or so about a pigment. And of course, every month, we're going to have like at least 2 talks talking about different subjects related to pigments and the cultural relevance to that. And then this is a work collaborative between Ready Institute and PRI, and he sponsors the Royal Society of Chemistry. And today we do have another special guest, which is very interesting topic. And then I'll lead Melanie to introduce Tammy. Take it away, Melanie.
All right, thank you, Raf. And thanks everybody for taking the time to join us today. For those of you who may not know who I am, I'm Melanie Anchetta. I'm the founder and director of Pigments Revealed International. We're a nonprofit organization focused on helping people understand how pigments have played a role in human lives from the very earliest of times, and how they've helped drive human cognitive development, scientific experimentation and developments, how they were important economically and politically, as well as their significance in cultural heritage and spiritual beliefs. Pigments are a lens through which we can examine any discipline to understand it better. And they're an extraordinary vehicle for incorporating traditional indigenous learning strategies and ways of knowing into these disciplines. I think pretty highly of pigments, and I'm hoping to lure all of you into their mystique as well. Today, our debut talk in this series, and we're really honored and excited to have a speaker who will take us into deep time in human history to the beginning. An archaeologist and curator for the Origin Center at Witwatersrand University in Johannesburg, South Africa, Dr. Tammy Hodgskiss Reynard is renowned for her work with Middle Stone Age, roughly 300,000 years ago, use of ochre. Her extensive list of publications is testament to her expertise, and you can find many of them on ResearchGate. Go check them out. They really are incredibly informative. Tammy's exploring the use of this versatile material, the use of it by hominins from before the beginning of our own species, and investigating its vital role in human cognitive, material and cultural and material and cultural development. Her work at the Origin Center and in the field is revealing astounding information about the cognitive and technical capacities of hominin and early humans, as well as giving insights into pre-human and early human spiritual practices and beliefs. It really is impossible to listen to her talk without feeling how deeply connected this particular material, ochre, is to who we are as humans today. We will have a Q&A following Tammy's talk. If you have a question, you can raise your hand or put it in the chat, and we will field those questions. I would like you all to please welcome Dr. Tammy Hodgskiss Reynard.
Thank you, everybody. It's really awesome to be here. And let me just share my screen.
Before we actually begin, it's just very important
cool
to mention that these lectures, well, the talk is being recorded.
Yeah.
Just if you are okay with that, that's fine. If you're not, please message me, like Melanie, or privately. We will be very happy to not share with the public afterwards. Thank you very much.
Okay, it says screen sharing is paused.
Then
I try to share it. It's typical.
Why is it trying to share mine?
Let me try again. Yeah, it just says screen
Who can
sharing.
share? It says that you should be able to. What are?
Yeah, it just comes up the little yellow thing. I've never seen it before. Oh man. Typical, all works nicely.
It worked fine a few minutes ago. So we'll figure it out. For, you know what really made me more comfortable with Zoom is I saw a talk by Dr. Narayan Kandekar, who is the head of the Forbes Pigment Archive at Harvard. He spent, I think it was 12 minutes trying to figure out how to screen share during a talk.
Oh no.
And that just, you know, stopped all my nerves about this.
Yeah, no, it happens. Is there anything, I've just looked at it quickly. Oh no, wait, there we go. Let me see. Wait, there's resume share. New share. Share. Wait, maybe that'll come up. It's coming up with strange options. It says new share.
Yeah.
Share.
It's like I said, they changed a bunch of stuff and now, no, I don't want to share.
Okay, so let me try.
That's
Yeah,
the only thing that's coming up for me.
So there's nothing on your side, Melanie, that says if you go
No.
to the screen. I don't know what to try. Actually, because it just says it's
Raf, do you want to, let's see if Raf can share.
Yeah, you can share again.
Usually,
Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, the last person who shared needs to give you permission, so he might have to do that.
Okay.
All right, so good to know.
Yeah, we don't normally have more than one co-host, so maybe that's what's.
Maybe.
So your screen sharing is off, right, Raf?
Yes.
Yeah, on this side, I just can't share it for some reason. No.
It'll be okay. We'll fix it.
Yeah, I don't actually know what else to try apart from.
So would you like to share your presentation? I'll be Monday. I'm happy to screen share for you. And in the meantime, because look it okay to me here, to be quite honest.
Yeah, you have it and you can share it.
Yeah. And look at here, it says like you have started screen sharing. So
yeah.
Yeah, and I have a button that says resume share, but I can't click on it.
Yeah, and I see at the top here it says we're viewing your screen.
Yeah, but then you can't. Yeah, because yeah, let's see. Let's try. Yeah.
Try sharing something else that, you know, like your desktop or something.
Okay. Let's just go to my email. There we go. You can see that.
yes.
Yep.
Okay, then let me go. There we go. Can you see that?
We can see
what
your
do you
email.
see? My email. Oh no, that doesn't help.
Yes.
So now it's only showing my email. Wonder why it's not showing.
So close the email and open your presentation.
Sorry, everybody.
That's okay.
Okay. There we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
I don't know why that happened. There's some loophole.
Yeah, it's, you know, it's just life in the digital universe.
Yeah, sorry about that, everyone. So now is it showing the full screen?
Yes.
Okay, so it's in the full screen mode. Cool. Welcome, everybody. It's really awesome to be a part of this. I always feel like when I give a talk, there's so much more I want to learn from the audience, because I know everyone has all these amazing, this amazing set of knowledge from diverse spaces. And so what I want to talk about tonight is just some of the work that's happening in the archaeological world with Ochre, and focusing specifically on South Africa, which is where I'm from and where the research that I'm involved with is based. So why do we care about ochre, and why do we care about its use in the past? Some of you might recognize this piece with the engravings on it. It's known as the Blombos ochre. It's about, I've got a little replica of it. It's about 10 centimeters big. It's not very big at all. But it was a piece that's found at a site called Blombos on the southern Cape Coast of South Africa. And it's dated to about 77,000 years old. And so it kind of been termed the world's oldest art. So the world's oldest art that we know of is made in ochre. A lot of the oldest evidence of, paint, the rock art, ochre is the main ingredients in that. And so with that comes all the meanings as to what does it mean about us being human? When did we get minds that are the same as ours now? And one way of seeing that is through complex technologies or through different ways of expressing oneself symbolically. And so with that, as well, is also there's a whole kind of host of things that come along with it to understand how to identify brains that are similar to ours. So cognitive complexity. And some of the things that we find archaeologically, excuse me, within the Middle Stone Age, especially from about 100,000 years ago. So the Middle Stone Age is 300,000 to 30,000 years ago, quite a large period. But especially after 100,000 years ago, you're finding really complicated stone tool technologies and bone tools, engravings on ostrich eggshell and ochre, plant bedding, which has insecticidal leaves on it. So people had a really good understanding of which plants to use, which plants to eat, the cooking of plants as well, and using the site spatially. So before that, we don't find that. Also the deliberate burial of the dead, or collecting of items and bringing back items to the site and not necessarily using them. So we know there was a whole host of things going on socially and behaviorally, as well as in our brains, around this 100,000 year period. And that's around the time where you're finding ochre being used regularly. But you do, at about 500,000 years ago, you find the earliest evidence of ochre use in Africa. And most of this evidence is just pieces that have been collected and brought back to the site. We don't have any evidence of use on the pieces. But then slowly, as you go through time, 300,000, 200,000 years ago, you're finding more pieces that are actually being used in some way. No rock art or anything yet, and no evidence of what the ochre was actually used for. But then you are also finding some early evidence in Europe, in a few sites in Europe. And so we know that ochre wasn't only used by Homo sapiens. And I think the new, I'm not sure if you've all heard about the new evidence with Homo naledi. So another species that, if the dating is right, lived alongside Homo sapiens. It does kind of question what was happening in the landscape over the last 500,000 years. And so what we look for archaeologically when we're studying ochre, and especially within the Middle Stone Age, because you have so much evidence that isn't well preserved. I always think of it as a puzzle, and you've only got a few of the pieces of the puzzle, and you're trying to get the whole picture from that. And so you have the ochre pieces itself that you find that were used in some way. You find residue, so evidence of the powder being produced, and maybe these really nice surfaces. You see the one picture there with a really nice ochre surface. So people must have been working in some way or grinding ochre and making this big patch of red ochre. You're finding tools that have been mixed. This piece in the middle from the Villa et al. Paper was ochre that was mixed with milk casein. And so wild bovered, and so used to scrape, so with this milky mixture, or it was used in mixtures to put with glues or gums and resins to put stone tools onto handles. You also find residues of it in shells that were possibly used for necklaces, and then you find grindstones and all the implements that are used with ochre as well. And so with all of those little pieces, we kind of try to put together the picture of how and why ochre was used in the past. And specifically, my focus is on early Homo sapiens, and kind of going through time to now. And as I mentioned, looking at the cognitive and behavioral capabilities of early modern human users. And with that comes the whole social aspect. Why did they need to use it? What did it mean to them in the past? And so I'm going to be presenting work that's been done by a whole range of different researchers at a whole lot of different sites over South Africa. But a lot of the sites are these beautiful sites that you can just, you can imagine why people chose those sites to live in or to visit. They're these beautiful shelter sites which would have preserved the archaeology. There would have been a lot more, people moving around the landscape as a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, but we find the evidence in these caves because it's been well preserved. And so these are just a few of the examples of some of the caves around South Africa. And yeah, so I'm going to kind of look at the ochre journeys, so how the ochre came to be in those caves, but also the journeys of the researchers, so how we actually get to the point of how we understand what the ochre meant and how people lived in the past. So there's a focus, so my focus has been on South African ochre use in the Middle Stone Age. And generally, there's been a lot more research done in South Africa. There are sites all around Africa and all around the world, of course, that have ochre in them. But Africa, a lot of the other countries in Africa the Middle Stone Age hasn't been as well studied as in South Africa. So we have the oldest art or the biggest ochre collections in the Middle Stone Age, but who knows what's going to be found in the coming years. It wasn't, I don't know, maybe South Africa was the place to be, 100,000 years ago, but it's definitely got to do with also where the research has happened. So the first thing that we look at is the actual pieces of ochre. And what we find from that, some of the pieces are a little centimeter big, others are nice big chunks. And so the evidence of that is actually how they processed it. So did they take the piece and grind it against a grindstone? Did they rub it against something soft like skin or animal hide? Were they scoring the piece maybe with a sharp stone tool or a shell to either scrape powder to get powder, nice fine powder off it, or to make a design? Or were they maybe using it as a tool and picking it? And so that's what we spend a lot of time using a microscope to kind of figure out what actual markings or use traces are on the piece to figure out how people actually used it in the past. And then I put crushing there at the bottom because that's always something that we might not have evidence of. You might find some red ochre powder in the soil, but was that a spill? Was that a piece that was just completely crushed up? And then we just don't have any evidence of it left. Then you also find, as I mentioned already a little bit, the residues on the tools. So, and what the ochre was, a little bit of how the ochre was used. So the two shells in the top right, the abalone or perlemoen, as we call it here, and these beautiful big shells that have been actually found also at Blombos Cave with a really nice ochre mixture with some charcoal in it and mixed in these beautiful shells at 100,000 years ago. So this Blombos is kind of the ochre mecca. There's just so much going on there, and it's quite a small cave, but there was something about using ochre in that space. The piece in the middle as well that has red lines on it, it's actually a flake of a tool, and it looks like it's got drawn markings in ochre on it. It's called the world's oldest hashtag. But it has a lot of, there's a lot of other things that we find of ochre. So it's not only the pieces, it's all the other little bits of evidence that we find that kind of help us put the picture together. And then from that, the experimental studies have been really important. And it's a part of archaeology that I love, is actually using finding modern ways of reproducing what you find in the archaeology. So finding ochre from a similar source or same kinds of ochre, making your own stone tools and figuring out the best way. Why would they have mixed ochre with resin to make a stone tool? Does it actually make a better glue? Or could it, if it doesn't, why would they have added it? Maybe it was to bless the hunt or symbolize blood, something like that. There's a lot that we don't know, but experimental studies have helped with that. And the jury's out a little bit on why it was added to these hafted tools, from about 60,000 years ago. We're finding these residues on the edges of the tools, that they were using ochre in resins. And some experiments have shown that red ochre, especially because we're finding mostly red ochre in archaeology at this time, maybe red ochre, it works better. And some studies have shown that it does. Whereas others have said, no, well, something like sand, even with silica, works just as well. So, and there's other factors that determine a good well-hafted tool for a spear or something. Then hide tanning is another one. So that's also something that you wouldn't find under very special circumstances, would you find it in the Middle Stone Age just because of preservation. And Rian Rifkin did amazing studies on looking at hide tanning and using different types of ochre to tan hide. And he found that it has antibacterial and antifungal properties, and it helps to break down the collagen to make a nice softer hide and stop smelling. So, and again, the red ochre actually worked quite a lot better, which often has a slightly higher iron content, the iron oxide instead of an iron oxyhydroxide, which is the yellows. But that's something that you would kind of have to infer, you know, if you're finding maybe scraper tools that were used to scrape the hide, or finding lots of red ochre, possibly they were hide tanning, but at the moment, there's no evidence of actually finding tanned hides in the Middle Stone Age yet. Then also some great studies that Rian did, looking at ochre as a skin protection. These beautiful pictures are from one of his papers that he worked with the Himba in Namibia, who cover themselves in this beautiful red ochre, and they mix it with clarified butter, which is the picture in the middle, is mixing it in a calabash. And they cover their whole bodies, their hair, jewelry, everything. And it is now a tourist attraction, but it is part of their cultural rituals, that it's a special way that they connect, and it's an important ritual for them. But it also actually works as a sunscreen. And the Himba have one of the lowest skin cancer rates in Namibia. So it actually does help with UV rays. I think Rian found that it had about a 13 sun protection factor, so it's not terribly high compared to sunscreens now, but also that the red ochre worked a lot better. And in terms of a mosquito repellent, it just worked as a barrier rather than actually repelling mosquitoes. And again, it's something that we wouldn't find in the Middle Stone Age, but we need to think of it when we're trying to understand why ochres were used. It's very easy to just assume it was only used for pigment. But the fact that it has so many other uses, you have to consider them when you're trying to interpret when you're finding a collection. And there's also been some great studies done recently by Joel Nivens, looking at using ochre powder as a polishing abrasive. So you can buy a jeweler's rouge, which is basically just a ferric oxide, very fine ferric oxide powder. And we find in some of these collections, these were mostly two of the pictures actually from sites in France. But then you're also finding at a lot of these sites that the ochre powder is actually in the hole of the beads. And so the thinking was, was the powder on the string that the beads were on? Was it used as part of the polishing process, and that's why you're only finding it in the holes? Or were the beads actually colored red, or maybe against people's skin that was red? And so studies have been done looking with different raw materials, and whether it's actually a good polishing abrasive, which it is. And depending on the kind of raw material, you'd want a different kind of ochre that either has a larger grain size, or if you really are only wanting shine, then you need a smaller grain size. So it's something that you might, that we have to consider when we're looking at the kinds of ochre that were chosen. Why were they bringing certain types of ochre back to a site and using only those? And then the changing of ochre using heat. So you can change a beautiful yellow ochre, you just heat it above 250 degrees Celsius, and it converts into this beautiful red. And there was a thinking that perhaps why we're finding so much red in the archaeology is that there was post-depositional fires built on top of it that has actually changed a lot of the pieces to red. Because a lot of these sites, this picture at the bottom right, is what a lot of these sites look like. There's layers and layers of hearths or fireplaces. So some of the ochre could definitely have been heated afterwards once people had thrown it away and turned into this red. And so, and we know that by, this is a really beautiful piece on the site of silkreed that's been used to make stone tools, that at 160 years ago even, they were finding that people understood that if you heated up the raw material under a fire, it would make a better raw material and you could make a better tool from it. And people have done experiments looking at why, did they know this before, or did they just use a piece of naturally heated silkreed? And they did actually know. So we know that already by 100,000 years ago, people had a pretty good understanding of how to transform their world, how to mix things together. And that has quite important implications for how our brains were wired at 100,000 years ago. And so, ochre is an element of that, and quite a cool indicator of, another way of understanding how people lived in the past. And then part of that is knowing how people moved across a landscape, the kind of interactions that were happening, which is something that can be quite hard to identify archaeologically. But there's been quite a lot of cool research recently looking at between sites, or looking at provenance studies to try and figure out where ochre was from. Were people traveling 100 kilometers to get a specific kind of ochre, or somehow was that ochre traveling through trade because it was a valued item? And so there's quite cool research being done on that. And I'm just going to share a few of the awesome pictures and sites that where some of these studies are done. So the earliest known ochre mine is in Eswatini, in just kind of within South Africa, a country within South Africa, and it's called Ngwenya Mine. And it was used as an iron mine more recently, but there's an archaeological site there called Lion Cavern that's been dated to 43,000 years ago, and a beautiful, almost fatty red ochre. It's a really, really beautiful ochre. This is just the walk up to the site. It's another ochre researcher in front there, Q and Handek. And this is going to Lion Cavern. And that's the entrance of the cave. So it's not a very big cave, but this beautiful, beautiful red rock. That's Law Dyer, also another ochre researcher. We had an ochre workshop there, which was amazing. But you can, really nice different types of ochre. So even though we know that the red ochre is pretty much throughout the Middle Stone Age in South Africa, red ochre was preferred. And that's what you mostly find, even if you're finding yellow ochre sources nearby. But even at this mine, you're finding different, in different veins in the geology, you're going to find different colors of ochre. There's some just what the pieces actually, the color coming from the pieces. And that's a view from the site. So if you turn around and look out over the hills, so it's a beautiful site, but really high up. So it would have been quite a hard trip to get to, and it's something that was clearly valued. And I'm looking forward to research coming out of this area, looking at how far this specific type of ochre was being traded out, or what rock art was it used for, and more recently. So it's quite exciting to the different chemical, or the studies looking at the geochemistry of the ochre is going to give a lot of insights into ochre use. And one of the people that's doing that over here is Brandy McDonald. And hopefully we'll get to come and do a talk sometime soon for PRI. Already she's doing amazing work understanding the sourcing and where ochre was from. And in the bottom over here, you can see these markings. And this was also in Eswatini, but it was basically alongside a road. So it's a much softer ochre. And you can see these markings are actually from people now that still use these ochre sources. We even found their tools, these sticks that they would use to dig out ochre. And one of the ladies that joined the workshop, Themba Hluli, she is Swati, and she was talking about these marriage rituals where ochre was still used at a pre-marriage ritual for women before they get married, and each family has their special ochre source, and so there's so much more, now and this is just one example. I'll go into a little bit more of. It's still being used widely in Southern Africa, but around the world, there are still a lot of communities that use ochre for various things, and not only just for pigment. And then, so also moving on from that is the ochre mining and foraging in the Western Cape. As I mentioned, Blombos is kind of the ochre mecca. You're finding these amazing things, and just a huge amount of ochre. This picture, it's a cool panoramic, but the cave itself is actually really, really small. And there's no ochre source nearby to Blombos. You'd imagine for the amount of ochre that you're finding that there'd be a beautiful source that people were just picking it, and it was a nice cave to process it in. But it's definitely, there was a movement of people around the landscape. At certain times, the sea level could have been many kilometers from the site. Now it's right there, and possibly there's an ochre source under the ocean. But we know that ochre was used in different ways at Blombos and a lot of the Middle Stone Age sites, especially along the coast. But so it was this valued item. And then I was very lucky to go with Lydia Pine, who's also, she's busy, she's an author writing a book on ochre, and going around some of the sources that another ochre researcher, Beth Velicki, had sourced with Brandy, looking at some of these sites along the Western Cape, quite close to Blombos, to figure out if these sources could have been the sources that were used in the past and brought back to Blombos and used for this piece that you see at the bottom. So these are some of the pieces that we found. And from the pieces that we found, there was none that were actually the same raw material. I mean, this was just very, not anything scientific. They're doing all the scientific work on it, and I'm really excited to see what comes out of their research. But none of the pieces that we found were that same hard, dense ochre that the Blombos ochre engraving was made on. So there's definitely something interesting about how ochre was traded around the landscape already at, I mean, this is about 70,000 years ago, 70, 80,000 years ago. And then this is close to home, so at Wits, at the university where I'm based. These are the Parktown shales that actually link up to they're part of the geology going to the mine, the gold mines just south of Joburg. And you can see these really nice banded iron formations. Some of the iron layers are actually magnetic, and then in between it you get these beautiful yellows and reds. And yeah, it's quite cool just on our doorstep that these ochres, and there's some sections that you can actually see have been used, especially along the sections outside of the campus along the road. You can actually see sections where people have dug out the ochre, so it is actually still actively used. And then I'm just quickly going to go through two sites in the Limpopo. So that's the northern province of South Africa. And some research, this is a site called Uliboomspoort, which has these beautiful gray specularite nodules. So yeah, archaeologically, what is ochre is a very broad term. So usually I think of it as an iron-rich mineral that has pigment, a soft stone that can give pigment, has some pigment qualities. But it doesn't necessarily need to be iron rich. It could be a hardened clay. So it's this huge range from really hard hematites and kind of shiny specularites like these gray pieces that have really nice purple, all the way to really soft shales and clays. So it's a really broad mix. And this site has, although it's Middle Stone Age, so dating from 100,000 years ago, it also has rock art that would have been more recent in the last few hundred years, possibly a few thousand. That this surface, actually the big picture at the bottom, is actually this red kind of wash that's over these sites. There's also some yellow ochres shown on the sites, on the walls, which is a very different color of ochre than we're finding in the Middle Stone Age assemblage. We're finding these dark purples, but what you're seeing on the walls are brighter reds and yellows. So there's definitely a lot more that we have to do around that. And then another site, Mulus, which is really close by. This is just a beautiful view. The site is actually at the bottom of the ridge there, and that's Paloma de la Peña, a Spanish researcher working in South Africa. And we did an ochre sourcing trip. And again, we're finding the same thing. You're not getting the same, we find these beautiful shales all around, but you're not finding the same types of ochre that are brought back to the site. So it seems like people are generally selecting very specific types of ochre to use, whether it's harder ochres, more iron-rich ochres, or the shiny, dark red ochres. which some have said, symbolize blood. That's, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done to understand exactly. And what comes into that very importantly is the ethnographic uses of ochre. And in South Africa, there's so many different groups of people that came through and moved around the landscape. So starting with the hunter-gatherers, or the San or Bushmen, there's lots of different terms used in different regions. That would have been a very diverse group of different languages and different cultural practices, but they are the people that would have made most of the rock art that we find in South Africa, this brush painted fine rock art. These two pictures were drawings made by Burchell. In the publication was in 1938. And it's of San and Khoi individuals that were wearing red ochre in their hair. So they actually, you can't see it very well in these pictures, but he describes it as they have this red paste in their hair, and it was used just as a, kind of to symbolize for their ritual dress. And not much more is said on it, but there's a lot of different accounts of groups all around that were using ochre as part of their daily life, whether it's for ritual or for paint or for skin protection, and medicinal uses as well. And so it's been really important to understand that, possibly, although we can't make links with people that lived 2,000 years ago to people that lived 100,000 years ago, it's so we do need to kind of be cautious, but it helps us understand a little bit more. And then also, so this is some more modern uses of ochre. This is the Himba in Namibia. The ochre all over their clothing, so for ritual and for skin protection. Then also the medicinal properties is something that's still widely around South Africa, but around lots of Africa as well, that it's sold at markets, different forms of it. So this is a really well-known ochre researcher as well, Francesco D'Erico, taking photos in Namibia of these beautiful red ochre nodules that the Himba woman was selling. This is a clay ball it's actually kaolinite that you can buy at traditional healer shops here. That's used during traditional healer training on skin. It's also eaten. It can help with stomach cramps. And similarly, you buy a similar form. This archaeologically, this would be termed ochre, even though it's a lot more chalky, so it would have a lot more calcium in it. That is used for stomach cramps and for cravings, if pregnant women have cravings for it. So there's a lot of uses still all around South Africa, and I had been thinking, kind of putting together a list of some of the words for ochre in different languages, and South Africa has now 12 official languages with sign language. And of those languages, there's so many. I mean, I haven't looked into it very much, but I'm always finding, as I'm chatting to people, different words for different types of ochre even. So it's not just it's a red stone. There's ones that are a shiny red stone or a wet red stone, or, so there's a lot of different words in different languages, and it's still so actively used within a lot of communities around Southern Africa. And then, kind of getting near the end is just, I thought I had to show some beautiful pictures of rock art, because that's something that, even though you don't find rock art in the Middle Stone Age, you find, there are lots of other evidence of ochre use, but we don't actually find any painted rock art. The earliest dated painted rock art in Southern Africa is in Namibia at 27,000 years ago, so still really old. But a lot of the rock art that can be dated, there's at the moment not many dating methods that can actually date the paint itself. Is dated, a lot is between 2,000 and 5,000 years old. And ochre is the main ingredient in them. Just they would have used different, egg and blood and different things as binders. But you find most of the rock art is in these yellows and reds, and you get whites and some black used every now and then. This is a beautiful picture from Namibia. And this one's lovely. This is from Game Pass in South Africa, and you can even see the brush strokes in the paint. So beautiful. I think the rock artists really had an amazing concept of how to make paint, and what to mix with it, and something that can last thousands of years. It's really impressive. And even though the rock art had a lot of spiritual meaning attached to it. It wasn't just an art form. I think as an art form itself is just, it's phenomenal. It's beautiful polychrome brush painted images. Yeah, and I mean, ochre is used around the world, as I've said, through periods, and South Africa for the Middle Stone Age is kind of been a focus of that, but there's still so much more to understand of why and how ochre was used across these landscapes. It's definitely something that kind of speaks to humans, whether it was an easy, material that you do find all around the world, and it's quite abundant around the world. But there was something specifically with red ochre as well. And part of my job that I really loved is kind of sharing that. And I think I've learned so much during these workshops that I offer at Origin Center. I've learned so much from the people that have come, with what people say. They'll say, oh, why did you mix it with this? Or my grandmother used it for this. And it's given me so many amazing ideas of, okay, well, why do I think about it in this way archaeologically? What misconceptions or preconceived ideas do I have of how ochre is used? And even, archaeologists in the past, if it was found at a Middle Stone Age site, it was, it's evidence of art, and that was what it was used for. This picture in the middle is my son. I think most ochre people and soil scientists their partners have to accept, and kids have to accept that when you go on holiday, you are going to be bringing bags of rocks and things home with you. And luckily my kids are willing to do it. This picture over here, the kid painting his legs, I loved it. He started off with the workshop not wanting to get his hand dirty at all. And by the end of it, he was painting all over his body. And I think it's such a nice way to kind of bring the past to life and to understand the complexities of making paint, but the complexities of understanding how people did things in the past as well. Kind of makes museum context so much more meaningful, I think. And so, it's just a lovely way that I've enjoyed, and it's actually been really good for me as a researcher to understand as well. So thank you very much. I've enjoyed chatting to you today, and I'm looking forward to having some questions or some comments. Thanks.
Thank you, Tammy. That is absolutely brilliant. And there's so much, there's so much in this that it's hard to even formulate questions in a way. Like, where do you begin?
That's how I feel all the time.
One of the things that struck me, and everybody, we would love to hear from all of you, whether it's a comment or a question. That's great. Put it in the chat or raise your hand by down at the bottom of your screen. You click the reactions button and there's an option for raising your hand. One of the things that really struck me, though, was when Tammy was talking about the language, the different terminologies that Indigenous people in Africa use for the different forms of ochre. The fact that there is so much language around it tells you how deeply embedded in that culture or those cultures it is. Here in the US, we just say red ochre. We don't qualify it as shiny or soft or fatty or whatever. And that feels like a lack on our part because we're so descriptive about other things. So I think that it's important that we look at how ochre is spoken about in other parts of the world to see how it relates to those cultures and to the historic use of it. Let's see.
I see the comment from
Let's see. Nicole says here in, I don't know how to pronounce that, grateful to the Mississaugas of the credit, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Wendat. Okay. I think that's about land acknowledgement.
And I mean, and that's something, you know, kind of that comes into the languages as well, is that in South Africa, there are so many different groups that did move around the landscape, you know, so from going to early humans, you know, we can't say it's not a cultural group, it's just, you know, everybody. But then going to different hunter-gatherer groups, and then herders that came down with the earliest livestock and sheep, and then other language groups that came down that, you know, so it's a very complicated thing. But yeah, Ochre played a part in most of the groups that I know of. And I mean, it's not something that I've researched very much because I've been focusing 100,000 years ago. But I still think there's still so much to understand from how people are using pigment now. And even though sadly, I mean, we are during apartheid in South Africa, we had a lot of people that were moved, and just colonialism were moved away from their land. And so I think as that would have happened, a lot of traditional knowledge would have been lost, you know, and you know, what was the need for, you know, we don't have access to the ochre that was needed for us. And so eventually a few generations and that knowledge is lost. But you still get communities that do, and different cultural groups that do. And so hopefully that's something that more research will be done on. It's definitely something that I'm really interested in, and I'm keen to understand better.
Well, to really bring that home about people being moved involuntarily, we're working with a group of youth in Uganda, and they actually had so little knowledge about red ochre that they were taking photographs. They're doing pigment research, and they were taking photographs of, say, a handful of berries that they thought they could use to make paint, while standing in front of one of the ant hills that are just pure, absolutely stunningly gorgeous red ochre. They didn't realize that the very ground they were standing on consisted of red ochre. They were looking for it in the trees and the plants, basically. And that's knowledge that's been lost in the last 2 generations, or even one. So this is impacting them deeply, to lose this traditional knowledge and how ochre was used by their cultures for, like you said, medicine, for, you know, for a functional object, for, you know, tanning hides or hafting something, eating it for pregnant women. I mean, it's crazy how fast knowledge can be lost, and how detrimental it can be to a group of people. Astrid, you've got your hand up.
Yes. Hi. Thank you for a very nice and good talk about ochre. A little bit new in this soil experimenting, or I'm investigating, maybe on my own terms, but I'm an artist, a visual artist. And I love the thought about the language. And it came to me that I once read that when we live in northern countries where there's a lot of green, our eyes are used to see green, so we kind of see more valued or more varied greens. So I've never been in South Africa. I'd love to go there. So I think also the senses of how we interpret, how we go into the world, is also where the language maybe involves. I come from Denmark, and we don't have a lot of words for feelings. We don't have a lot of words for colors, but so we are very concrete in our country. So it's very, but the ways to see green, we have a lot of ways to see green, and we actually have a lot of green words. So maybe that could be a way to go into the. I don't know if I have a question about it. It was just something that came to mind of me. So
that's great. And
it's
it's an interesting observation, because actually in isiZulu they have luhlaza is a word that means green and blue, and you either say green like the grass, or green or blue like the sky, but the green and blue word is the same word. So there's even not even a different word for blue and green. So it's really interesting. And I mean, here we have a lot of beautiful red soils, but still in the environment, it's interesting. It just makes you kind of think, because there's a lot of red and different colors of red soils, and people had to move around landscapes and live really closely with the soils. I mean, that would have been anywhere in the world, but yeah, there was just different terms because people needed to use those things more. So it's an interesting thing to think about.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Astrid.
Yeah.
Janine Mullen says that Tammy said that iron is not always in ochres. Is pigment the common material?
So ochre will give pigment. So you can get lots of pigment from different things, So I know, Melanie's Vivianites, that's is going to have these amazing blue pigment coming from it. But with ochre, it means it's for me, it's usually an iron-rich mineral that has a yellow, orange, or red, or purpley powder or streak that comes from it. But I know we were chatting with Gillian Huntley in Australia, and there a lot of the ochres that the Aboriginal communities still use aren't actually iron-rich either. So they might have silicas and phosphates and other magnesiums and other things in it that will give the pigment. But yeah, for me, all of the ochres that I've worked with and found archaeologically here are iron-rich. And our soil is just so iron-rich as well.
And that kind of goes back what you said about Jill and the Australian use of ochre. In Australia, they use the word ochre for a lot of different pigments, a lot of different colors, whether they have iron in them or not. But that goes deep back into their own history and how they use these materials and how they've built language around that. Sabine, do you have anything to say about that?
Yeah, I could share two things, and I have a question. But I was visiting the ochre site in Roussillon and had the privilege of also meet the lady who is behind the ongoing mining of that site today. And she was very offended with David Cole's definition of ochres. Ochre is a very precise thing, and they have to be iron rich, but they also are not colored earths, and like chalk and cheese in her opinion. And like a burnt sienna, a raw sienna is not going to be an ochre because it's got this on top of it, and that one is. So she was really reducing the ochre definition to something quite precise. And I actually mentioned another ochre site that I know about in the north of France, and she said, no, these guys are not real ochre. It was it was obviously a very, very limited little sect.
Well, and it's a very sensitive subject to some cultures.
Yes,
you know, a lot of times here in the US and Canada, red ochre isn't talked about among Indigenous communities. It's information about it is generally not shared with anybody outside the community, first of all, and even within the community, because it's quite often used for ritual and ceremonial purposes. It's not talked about except by the people who have the for lack of a better term, permission to use it. So red ochres can be a very, very individual and subjective thing to even a person, but definitely within certain cultures. So watch what you're calling ochres when you go into other landscapes.
But
I
can
use
I
it
ask
very
you-
broadly.
Can I ask you a question also, Tammy, because you mentioned an artwork from and showed us an artwork from 27,000 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, or at
Yeah.
least estimated. And so between the Blombos caves and that artwork in South Africa, and I apologize for my complete unknowledge, are there other artworks that have been dated and are closer to the date of the Blombos caves? I'm just curious to see if there was, yeah.
Yeah, so you find kind of through time in the Middle Stone Age, you find more evidence of ochre being used. You don't, yeah, I mean, that's the earliest dated rock art, but we might find once dating methods are improved that we find more older rock art. But you find sites where you'll have a lot of ochre, you'll find ostrich eggshell beads, you know, like all this cultural material that people were very clearly communicating with each other and had social interactions and group identity and individual identity as you go through time. But I find there's something that's kind of missing in the research, and maybe, I mean, I've been too focused on the Middle Stone Age, but there's a lot of kind of assumptions made for the later Stone Age, as in what, you know, what people are doing. Oh, okay, yeah, of course we're dealing with modern humans, and so they could do everything and they could think symbolically and great, you know. But it's not actually researched. Ochre, at least, isn't researched in the same way to understand, were people using it in the same way? Are they using it with the same items? Like you do find it on ostrich eggshell beads, and you do find it being used more, and there is some research, hopefully that's, you know, more research being done on it, but I think it's something that isn't well understood, or it isn't well tackled specifically in terms of, you know, yeah, what's happening in that in-between period. You know, we look at the changes in the stone tool technologies and know people were,
Yeah.
you know, like communicating a lot, but yeah,
Yeah.
there's still a lot to be done, I think.
Maybe more about that later.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's important to note that while they're looking at very intensively at stone tool technology, and they've got a very good understanding of that, the use of ochre and other pigments, which is something that quite often relates to spiritual beliefs and practices, is being overlooked. I mean, it's just now starting to become you know, something that they are looking at in archaeological circles. I mean, I know here in the Northwest, there has been, I quite literally am the only person who has done any research on pigments and paint technology here, you know, so, and it's the same in other places around the world. This is a very, very new field of research, but it's something that's vital in understanding the culture's evolution and social structure, political, economic, I mean, systems, all of this. I think it's going to become a very important factor in understanding the past, our past. I want to move on to some other questions. Let's see. Caroline has a question. Absolutely amazing talk. Thanks, Tammy. This is Caroline Nicolay. It's such inspiring research. Her question is, do you know of any ochre use in connection to houses, specifically wall paintings, or maybe something else?
So now, currently, you'll still have people that will use ochre to paint their houses, and in the clays that they use for houses when they're making more traditional houses. But it's something you very occasionally, you don't find usually housing structures. You might find stone walling, or wooden, the flooring of what we call daga. So it's like cow dung mixed with, with soil, and you find this hardened floor, but you don't usually find the walling apart from the actual stones. And I don't know, because it's out in the open, that's an interesting thing to think of. I can't remember any examples where people have said, well, we found plastering around the stones and that has some color on it. I don't think I've heard anything about that, but it's definitely something that is still by many different language groups and cultural groups around South Africa that actually do still use it when they make traditional walling. They'll use it in the clays in the paint.
She also asked if you have a favorite ochre related object.
Oh, okay.
Or does that change every day, like for the rest of us?
Yeah, so many. Yeah, no, I think, the Blomboos ochre is amazing. And when I got to be, like, I have a picture of it right next to my face. I couldn't touch it, but all I wanted to do was lick it. But no, I think that's, the Blomboos ochre was just amazing. And it was cool to actually be next to it. But that's actually a good question, because I think I'm always so excited, just to find a piece of ochre, and especially when they're these beautiful red pieces that are shiny and they just look beautiful. You can imagine why someone picked it up, because it just looks cool. Yeah. But yeah, I need to think about that one, actually. I'm sure there's been cool pieces. I did the Subudu, so it's also a big Middle Stone Age assemblage in KwaZulu-Natal, so on the east coast of South Africa, and an amazing site, and that was for my PhD research, and I think I connected with all the ochre pieces in that. There was something like 9,000 pieces, and I just spent so many months of my life staring at them. So they would have to have a special place in my heart.
Maria Castro says, thanks for this amazing talk, Tammy. Is there any other pigment in the archaeological record during the MSA besides iron oxide, manganese oxide, perhaps?
So you're actually finding nodules of it. Sorry, is it? Oh yeah, there we go. So very little in South Africa. So if you're going into Europe, then you're finding more manganese oxide, and you're finding that also in the paints. But in South Africa, no, it's you hardly even find any black paint. Mm-hmm. And most of the lumps, whether you're calling it ochre or hematite, that would be the main kind of, is ochre hematite, is it the same thing? And that'll get lumped together usually archaeologically, but very rarely manganese oxide.
Well, and that is definitely dependent on what your geology is.
Yeah.
If you don't have manganese oxide or black iron oxide or whatever, celadonite, which is a beautiful green pigment. Yeah. If you don't have it in your region geologically, it's not being used, especially that far back.
And there was a comment on obsidian, and it's the same thing. Yeah, so with stone lithic technologies, you can kind of trace also really nicely where the source was, how far were they going to collect certain types of material for stone tools. And we don't get obsidian and flint in South Africa. So stone tools are made on much kind of coarser, less glassy raw materials, which came with a whole nother set of skills and complications. But it's what's available on the landscape.
Yeah. Come on, scroll down here. Let's see. Trying to see where this question starts in. Elizabeth says, fantastic, Tammy. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. You emphasized a few times using ochre for many purposes, medicinal, ceremonial, etc., aside from just as pigments. As an archaeologist focused on ochre, do you find yourself more often needing to explain ochre as a material for creative expression, or needing to explain it as a material with practical uses?
I like that question, and
Yeah.
that's been part of my journey as well. And I think since I met Heidi and Melanie and kind of got to know the PRI community, because I came from a very science background. It was, I'm looking at these pieces of ochre and what do they tell me? And that's all. And I didn't know much about its use as a pigment at all. And I think it was so amazing to realize, actually, wow, this is something that is used so much still around the world now, and is actually mostly used for pigment. You know, I mean, there's are many other uses, but its main obvious use is as a pigment. So initially I would have had to convince myself, you know, I would be on the side saying, no, it was used for practical things, you know, it wasn't just a pigment. We can't say it's a pigment in the past. And now I'm kind of going the other way. I keep on finding myself saying, well, obviously it was used for a pigment because it's so pretty. And I think also once I've got to use it myself and appreciate the value of actually how nicely it makes a paint, I've kind of gone over to the other side.
Well, it's kind of astonishing to realize that today the red iron oxide has a huge commercial market as a paint. It's like when they paint the red lines for like a parking area or something on pavement or tarmac, that's red iron oxide. I mean, it's used for all kinds of things in the paint industry, you know, in big ways. So it's not just a pigment for artists, it has a very large commercial market too. But it's also used for other things. You know, it's iron.
Yeah.
You know, pure and
simple.
simple.
That is something that would have been lost more with indigenous knowledge and with people being, you know, moving away from traditional ways of doing things. I think the more diverse uses of it would have been lost first before the pigment uses, because it's just more obvious and accessible.
And when it's used for, one of the things I've discovered here is when it's used for ceremonial purposes, most culture groups will only use that which is sourced locally. They don't want it traded in because it doesn't have the same significance because it's from a different place. Places have so much power, particularly in indigenous cultures, that what you obtain in a place has special, you know, potency.
Yeah. So
that's something to keep in mind too when you're thinking about pigments in relation to trade, particularly pigments like red ochre and vivianite that were used for ceremonial and ritual purposes. I think it's the same is true in Australia and New Zealand. That they use it in the same ways and have the same like protocols and things around it. Do we have any other questions?
Some cool comments. Cool. Yeah, any other comments or questions?
Yeah, I do have actually a question. That was not really a question, maybe like as a comment. When we talk about the iron oxide they use for UV blocking and all that, for skincare protection, but you could also use that as a photocatalyst. And
as a what catalyst?
Red ochre you could use as a photocatalyst.
Oh,
For
okay.
environmental remediation.
Do you want to explain that?
And then you can ask yourselves like, well, is a photocatalyst, why and how people back then knew how to use that to skincare, like to protect the skin against the sun or against the UV radiation, right? Something like we can investigate that. And then I just did a quick search here, like I Google it, and I think it was there's a paper published early this year or last year on scientific reports about exactly these nanocomposite from South Africa using red ochre to actually as a skincare product. But now it is also UV active because you can do so as a photocatalyst. So how can we actually try to explain that or understand that?
Yeah, that's the thing, you know, and it wasn't something that people just had put it on their skin and they were like, hey, well, I'm not, you know, I didn't get hurt from the sun, even though I was in the sun for 3 hours or the whole day walking across the landscape. And they, might not have understood the more scientific properties of what exactly it's doing, but the actual barrier on your skin, you know, I suppose that's a logical thing. Like we would put mud on our skin to protect us from the sun if we didn't have sunscreen, just to physically put something on the skin.
Well, and even animals, if any of you who have read Heidi Gustafson's Book of Earth, read that like vultures will bathe in a puddle of red ochre to clean any bacteria and blood and things like that off of their feathers. Whooping cranes will ornament themselves with red ochre. They'll dip it up with their beak and spread it on their feathers, and then they leave it on, and it has something to do with their mating rituals. It apparently makes them more attractive somehow or something. And other animals use red ochre in various ways, whether it's as a skin protection or ornamentation or whatever. We can't, definitely be certain about that. But, there's always this human thing about mimicking nature. And nature is where early humans learned so much from. How did the animals do this? Or, what were the results when the animal did this? So
true. I like Janine's comment is maybe it just felt good when they put it on, and it's true. You get a really nice.
Maybe it looks good,
and it does. Yeah, it looks good, feels good. Like that little kid who just was like, no, this is awesome. I just need to paint the whole body as much as possible. That's it. And I think, maybe we should, in the science world, take ourselves a bit less seriously and think of like, what if.
Exactly. That's the same thing. It's like, why not? Right. So that's the whole discussion we try to make here with the seminar series too. Can we actually introduce that into STEM curriculum and teach that way, but not of course using the scientific approach and the results. But look, this is also a possibility, right? So we should actually consider that.
Well, and how many of us pigment people have looked at a pigment and said, oh, I just want to roll around in that. I just want to cover myself in it.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a very common reaction for a lot of us. We see this gorgeous color and we just want to wear it.
Yeah.
So, sometimes in a lot of cases, there's no definitive answer that we're going to find. And I think that that's part of the wonder and the mystery of all of this. We do need to leave some things up to mystery. We can't, take everything apart and identify it categorically and put it in its little slot. Just, it's like Janine says, it felt good.
Yep.
And people need to learn to trust that more. When they see something or do something that feels good, go with it. Don't question it. It's like, go roll in that puddle of red ochre.
We won't judge.
That's what a child would do.
Yeah.
And and that's something that as adults, a lot of us have lost, is that impulse to do something that looks fun.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually also that's something that we need to think of in the archaeology is what are we looking at? When are we looking at things that kids made? You know, when is it a doodle that, you know, a group of kids are like, oh, let's bash up these rocks because it's fun, you know, and
Yeah.
then we read all its meaning into it. Oh, it must have been some special ritual and they were collecting a certain type of ochre.
Honestly, how many of us made mud pies as kids?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all of us.
You know, so
Yeah.
Okay,
uh,
so I think we got to what at least is 105 here.
yeah.
So we approach the end of the seminar for today. So let's thank again, Tammy, for this wonderful moment and for sharing the knowledge. So we really appreciate that. Thank you very much, everyone, for for attending the first seminar. So we also gonna have another seminar coming up November 8th, I suppose.
Yeah, I think it's the 8th.
But you will see on our like social media, Instagram and email, you're gonna be receiving that information. So hopefully we're gonna have a lot to discuss in the upcoming seminars as well. We're gonna be using a kind of mushrooms to identify some cool pigments as well.
Yeah.
All right.
And the talk on the 8th will be Mia Urim, who is a microbiologist, and she will be talking about microbial pigments. And Kabir, what will be Kabir? We're having two speakers
Kabir
on
is
the
a
8th.
microbiologist as well. He will bring the very much Western science approach to fungi. So actually technical definition of that. And then the whole idea of the seminar series to actually combine, have like a let's hold space and walk together and share knowledge somehow. So we're going to bring the traditional way, the culture relevant way, and then also the Western science approach.
As I say, this is science and art marrying and begetting something. Yeah.
Exactly. All right.
Thank you all. It was lovely seeing everybody today. Thank you. And thank you, Tammy. It's brilliant as always.
Cool. That was so cool. Thank you.